Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the 11th session of Sharing Challenges. And that's not just business and management challenges, but also personal challenges. And I don't think when I started this 11 weeks ago that I realized that we would still have such a great audience after such a period of time. In fact, somebody wrote to me today and said yesterday that it was not just valuable, but maybe even a vital part of their week. We're very humbled by that. So thank you. Now, moving on to today, what are we doing today? Well, we're looking, as always, at different aspects of the issues which have been raised by you as the participants on this call. And for those who've been on the call in previous weeks, you've probably seen this list slightly tweaked before, so bear with me. But for those who are new, I think it's important that we just kind of reflect on what are the key issues which are emerging from the various interactions and from you as the audience on this particular Friday morning. So first of all, the optimal role and multiple styles of an effective leader leadership team. There's a lot we're talking about, is there one style or is there multiple styles? We heard from Richard Thorby on that. Ensuring all your people are in a safe office environment, and that becomes particularly important as people are now looking to return to offices, albeit perhaps not in the same numbers as before. Preserving the firm's reputation on making tough decisions. The marketing people have been giving some good insights on that. Winning work from new clients to sustain the workforce. New clients obviously still seen as a major area of challenge for people, I think. Maintaining the team productivity, morale, mental health and well-being, and we always seem to talk aspects of that. We can talk a bit more about this today, but planning assumptions and alternative scenarios for the new normal, and that I think is increasingly moving up the agenda at firms. Professional relationships and strategies of communication, that's absolutely the piece that Andy's going to be referring to a bit later. Serving local and international clients, we're lovely to have Francesca and her international perspective on each of these calls. Financial metrics, we heard from the bankers last week. False dawn, they were saying, which is quite an interesting terminology. Are we actually quite cash rich, but just worrying about paying the income tax bills in January, etc. Managing suppliers and the key contract clauses. James talked a little bit about actually contracts effectively a data set. So are you managing that data effectively? Cybersecurity and phishing, amazing work having been done by the technology infrastructure people. Are they now moving into new tech or not? Or is that remaining the domain of the Director of Innovation? We'll pick that one up a bit later. Now, the two that I always think are really, really important, rationing your time to create space for real emergencies. It's really easy to be busy. And are you really doing the right things, the things that really, really matter? So keep that a little bit of free time, because something really happens, then you need to be available. And getting everyone to realize that everyone needs some downtime, and that includes you. So those are the issues that have been raised by a very large number of people in lots of different countries. And thank you for that. And each week we tweak it a bit. I won't tell you where there were changes, but each week we are enhancing that list, which is obviously shared with government, etc. I always like to show this one as well, because this comes from a lady in Bratislava on a call that I was at back in April. And I thought as sort of 7 strategies when facing a pandemic, they're really, really helpful. First of all, think big. As Lewis Carroll said, have you believed 6 impossible things before breakfast? Secondly, you are the power of your connections. I know Andy will have lots of thoughts about that, but you've got to reciprocate favors. It's not a vacuum cleaner. Think small. Think about the angles that will the angles that will resonate with your key audiences. Do a series, not a one-off. This is a great series. We have created an audience. I just say, by the way, this is what we're doing this week. Everyone say, that's great. And then they come. Drop the convention. Go for the new ideas and the services. That's also important. Remember that speed is of the essence. And this is lean start thinking for those who are into that area. To articulate and market test your assumptions. And if they prove invalid, amend them and pivot in a new direction. It depersonalizes those difficult conversations on the board if you take that approach. And be entrepreneurial. But in practice, what does that mean? It means keep listening and innovating. And by far and away, the most important word in that sentence is listening. If you're not listening, then how can you make sure you deliver what your clients want and what your people need? And thank you to Alina Cusco of Bratislava for Globstadt Bratislava for those thoughts. I think they're wonderful, nice little sort of haiku almost to things that we should bear in mind. Moving on, who's on today's panel? Francesca, welcome back. Lovely to have you. And as usual, she'll be picking up some of the themes that she's identified over the past week and then exploring them a bit more depth. We then move to Andy, who is, some of you will gather from my producer notes, is a prolific author, conference speaker, focusing very much on business relationships, professional relationships, referrals, and actually how to bring people together in ways that feel authentic and rather than just sort of what I call volume count. Ian Jeffery, managing partner of Low Silkin for I think 15 years, has probably therefore tackled most of the challenges that most of the managing partners on this call will be fairly familiar with, and great to have your insights, sir. Now moving into a new role with much more of a focus on how his firm can use some of the new technologies for competitive advantage. And then finally today, Jeremy, who again, some of you will recall, has been on the call, I think, every other week now, and a little bit about his video diary, what's been interesting for him over the last couple of weeks. And I'm sure he will have some views along with Ian on some of those very strongly management partner leadership issues and concerned with moving intelligent, smart, clever people to do new things in a way that they're not sure they really need to. But maybe that's changed with the pandemic. Let's find out. Me, obviously, as usual. What I normally like to do at this stage is kind of just give you a little bit of an insight into the poll result from last week, which is obviously helping Andy, because this is his professional relationships wheel. If you recall, and we'll do the poll in a minute, we have 10 questions, and for each of those questions, I can show you the instant results, but actually when you see them in a radar chart, you get a much, much better idea as to exactly what messages are emerging. And the way it works is 10 is in a good place, 1 is not so good. And what Andy has done is he's identified, in this case 10, he's actually got 15, but Zoom only allows 10, so I had to do some editing there. But under the headings build, 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 starting from 12 o'clock round to about 3, those are the 3 things that people should be focused on in order to build. Then you have 3 in the nurture space and 4 in leverage. And as you will be talking a little bit about the outliers, and obviously we look there, we can see that there are building strongest relationships with similar people and maintaining contact with existing relationships are the ones where people felt their people were strongest. This is not, if you recall, a personal assessment. It's therefore hearsay, arguably in academic terms, but it's still really valuable because at the end of the day, planning assumptions are made based on these sort of stuff. And then in terms of the ones where people are perhaps less confident, then willing to ask for key introductions, and absolutely towards the bottom by quite a bit, in fact. Are they comfortable asking for help and being vulnerable? Now, vulnerable is not a word that many professional people are very comfortable with, but again, Andy will talk a bit about that and how you might move to that space in a positive way. So that's really the quick feedback from last week's poll results. And just again, we are not alone. UK government has made it very clear that these poll results are incredibly valuable to them. So please, when it comes to the poll in a second, do contribute, because it is actually being used not just for us, but for policy makers as well. This looks a bit bright, doesn't it? Aftershocks and opportunities, scenarios for a post-pandemic future. We're going to do something different next week, so I was giving you a little bit of an upside here. Sharing challenges next Friday, a little bit longer. We're going to have a 20-minute presentation from Rohit Talwar, who is the author of this book, or I suppose he's one of the 25 contributors, but it's 25 futurists who are writing about what they think are the scenarios and, more importantly, possibly the actions that governments will be taking as the pandemic ceases and we move into this post-pandemic future. And Fast Future does a lot of these kind of books. They're really useful and interesting. It gets published on Monday, so it's a bit of a sneak preview here. And then after his presentation, we've got a 60-minute, it might be a little bit less, 45, 60-minute panel session, which Francesca will be on, Neville Eisenberg, and a couple of others. And they'll be looking at some various scenarios that are emerging. So, okay, is our firm prepared for this sort of scenario? What might it mean? How might we go about it? So a very different sort of session from the one we've done, but as Monty Python said, and now for something completely different. So I thought I'd give you a little bit of an upside. Question 1, to what extent do you agree that governments will introduce some form of universal basic income services? Overall disagreement, but pretty evenly spread on that one. There's quite a few who agree with that. And I think if the idea that everyone was going to get paid money even if they don't work was something that would probably be fairly implausible a few months ago. So that's interesting. Do you expect the government will fund and improve access to healthcare and mental health services for all? Yeah, there's some agreement on that. More than half of you are saying they agree with that. So how that will work in America, I'm not sure, but given their health system doesn't usually work on that basis, but that's another story. Moving on to implement national mechanisms for horizon planning. Not get caught with the tide goes out, as Warren Buffett so memorably put it, with your trunks down. And there's agreement on that. It's not hugely agreement, it's just slightly 52%, but at least there is agreement that our government's going to have to expect to be better at planning for less normal but high profile or key events. Again, are we going to be, yes, government will be looking to firms, higher earners and the wealthy to help pay the bill. There's some quite strong agreement on that. I think we're all going to be, as relatively wealthy community, finding ourselves being asked to contribute more to society. That one comes through really quite strongly. 90% agree with that. In terms of will government change? I think people are on the fence on that one, quite frankly. Some think agree, some disagree. The number of people are saying that politicians have never been scrutinized as the way at the moment, so they may be forced to bring in new models, but they may just sort of duck and dive in the Cummings style, who knows. Do you agree that lack of coordination to the wealthiest nations will extend the crisis? Yeah, sadly there is some agreement, I think, there. 74% think that the lack of coordination is actually likely to extend the crisis, and that we're going to be in this place for, and that's a lot of, or only 10% disagree with that, which is really quite strong views. And similarly, to the extent that you agree business will place a greater priority on its responsibilities for the environment, again, very strong views there that CSR will stop being just kind of, oh, have we spent enough in that particular budget, become something that actually much more around the way we do business. And equally, quite strong agreement around business will pay. Balancing the bottom line, in other words, rather than just being around profit, it's also about planet and purpose and people and prosperity. I think that's, again, there's views there. Will government intervene to tax monopoly gains resulting from the winner takes all new tech? Ian may have some views on that. Yeah, there's some agreement there, but there's not that many disagree with that, but quite whether they're going to sort of suddenly lock up Mark Zuckerberg, I'm not sure. I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. And lastly, to what extent do you government will intervene to fund the retraining of workers? In other words, sort of extending the existing furlough type scheme, but into helping those who need to be retrained, primarily because of new tech. Again, agreement, but there's more agreements than disagreements. So I think that's actually quite an interesting set of findings that may help our conversation today when we look at the validity of some of the planning assumptions that we're facing. But also, I think will, how shall I put it, certainly help the panel next week looking at some of the scenarios that Rohit's going to be presenting to us. So I'll stop sharing now. Thank you for the poll contributors, for everybody. And I will pass on over to Francesca, who's going to be talking us through what are the things that have caught her attention over the past few days. Over to you.
Thank you, Richard. That's an interesting poll, wasn't it? I'm going to just use the 3 questions that you set out for this particular session as a framework for sharing some things from this week. And as always, there's a huge amount still going on. And I think it's very fair to reflect that whatever we talk about today, nobody really knows where the future's going to go. So there's still an awful lot of trying to find your way in different elements of the post-pandemic world. But I want to start with the building lasting relationships piece that Richard set out, because I think there's an internal and an external element to this, and it's just felt very live this week. The whole piece around building lasting relationships, hugely important from a client perspective, but from an internal perspective, I suspect that many of you, like me, have been more in touch with your teams, the people you work with, than almost ever before. The easy switch on of a camera, you're chatting, and many groups have been meeting far more frequently than they would have done otherwise, and in some cases every day. And I think now we've got to a point where people are going, that's been lovely, but maybe we need to meet slightly less often because there's now more work that needs to happen. We're kind of through that respond stage of the pandemic, and into that we need to rebuild, we need to renew, and we need space to do that. So it's been interesting to see some of those meetings begin to move into every other day or once a week or every fortnight. And that's been quite common across all the various internal groups that I've been working with. With clients, there's a touch of that too. I think a lot of clients wanted huge amounts of our attention at the very beginning, and now we're going, we need a little bit of space, but we still want to know we've got access. So there's a rebalancing happening there, which I think is fascinating. On the client element of it, the relationship, I always think professional services are all about relationships in any event, and the best clients you have are the ones you have the deepest relationships with. But again, there's something intriguing going on with clients who have been going, well, what I really want to have is that really build on that slightly different relationship that we can have now. Is it about You stand by us in bad times, and we'll see ourselves right in good times. So that usually tends to be around fee discussions, I find. Is there a piece there also about, actually, we want to have different types of conversation? And I know we've mentioned before around different kinds of coaching conversations, different kinds of listening, different kinds of approaches to deepen that client relationship. But I was chatting to one client who works with us in a number of different parts of the world. And they've been saying over a few years, well, it's kind of okay, but we're sort of looking at our options and we're thinking about how the world should go. And I was chatting to them this week and they were saying, what's been very good is we had a good relationship. We've actually seen during this very difficult time, you've been really responsive. We now think that there's actually a lot to be said for keeping that relationship going. And let's explore what more we can do together. And I think that probably resonates with everybody. You know, the clients where that relationship has been the foundation for the work that you do. And there's lots of, as we always say, low-hanging fruit, but there's lots of great opportunities for new work or different kinds of work, as again, we rebuild and renew some of those relationships. So having an existing relationship doesn't mean that you can't renew it as time goes on. Two quick other things from me, Richard. Getting clever people to change. I think we all work with incredibly bright, thoughtful people, think hard and bring huge knowledge. And why don't we change? Why don't things move? And I was chatting to someone from McKinsey and they were saying, well, look at this bit of research we did a few years ago in Silicon Valley. And we've been talking about working from home and how much better it is. And people like myself, I've worked from home all my career for at least 1 day a week, often 2 or 3 days a week. Why do people not do that? Why didn't people do that before the pandemic? And they showed me some research where they had tracked a particular high-tech company that had really pushed working from home. And over a decade, they'd only got to 8% of people wanting to work from home. So it is intriguing to see, will people actually just revert back to the old normal, or will they see various things from the current stage they really want to carry on? Last but not least, changing attitudes. At the moment, it's all very real. It's all very live. When a few months have passed, will people feel any differently from how they do today? But that sense around how we actually have to help each other, particularly in terms of working isolation, I think is a huge, huge issue that hasn't yet been fully thought through for anybody. I don't think anyone's got the answers around that. So if we do move more towards distanced working, what will that really be like? And I was listening to an amazing economist. She actually works for us in the US. She's called Diana Swank, and she's fantastic. Highly recommend you go and hear her on the many things that she does. And she was talking a lot around the double dip. Now we're talking a lot about coming out of a lockdown now. I think most people think there will be a double dip. Might be more localized, might be smaller. But what does that mean? How are we planning for that as well? So there you go, Richard. That's all from me.
Oh, thank you very much. Well, it's not all from you, Francesca. I'm sure we'll have some more words of wisdom later, but thank you for now. That was great. Andy, come and join us. Welcome, Andy, who's not joined on this call before, the show, if you like. And I think he'll be picking up some of those relationship points. And as I say, obviously, it was his diagram relationship wheel that I was exploring a little bit earlier. So that saved him some time explaining it to you as well.
Thank you very much, Richard, and also for those comments, Francesca. It was really interesting to hear your take on that. One of the phrases that's really stood out for me during the lockdown and has come up time and time again, and I mentioned it on Wednesday when we did the session as well, was that people will remember how you treated them during the lockdown. And I think that was reinforced by what Francesca just said. But I've also heard people talk about being too busy to really focus on professional relationships. Now, I hear that all the time. It's the biggest challenge that my clients face. But the two don't quite balance out, because if you get too engrossed in the transactional nature of business and you forget the relational element of it, then everything becomes harder for you and actually takes more time. And particularly right now, if you're not invested in those relationships, then people are going to notice it and pick up. One of the key things I talked about on Wednesday in the longer session was the impact you have on other people is magnified because their sensitivities are heightened with everything else that they have to worry about at the moment. So I think that's a key point just to flag up. What I wanted to do, thank you for sharing the spider diagram and the poll results. I just wanted to pick up on the outliers, as you said, one from each of the areas. with building professional relationships, you picked up on the high score for having professional relationships that are strong professional relationships with people who are similar to you. Now, that's actually a little misleading question, because it's not necessarily a strength to have a network of people who are just like you, and particularly at times like this. I strongly recommend Matthew Syed's recent book, Rebel Ideas, which is all about the power of cognitive diversity. And if you're trying to find a way through uncertain times, it's your network, it's the professional relationships you have that can feed new and innovative ideas to you. And if you only surround yourself with people who are surrounded by similar people, who think in a similar way, who are educated in a similar way, who live in a similar bubble, and we keep hearing this terminology bubble, then you're going to get fed the same ideas all the time. So I would actually challenge that high score and say that you should perhaps look to reverse it and look to expand networks in industry sectors with people who think differently, to breathe some new ideas in. Phil Jones, who's the managing director of Brother UK, said to me, a great leader needs to inhale new ideas from outside their business so that they can breathe them back into the business. And I thought that was a wonderful way of putting it. On nurturing professional relationships, you had particularly high score in terms of staying in touch with clients. And my challenge to you is this: if you've scored your teams highly for staying in touch with clients because they have to reach out to them and they have to have conversations about the transactions they're working on, that doesn't help professional relationships. I mean, it doesn't hinder them. If clients feel ignored, that's a challenge, but it doesn't elevate them. Francesca talked a lot about different types of conversation, and nurturing professional relationships means engaging with people when you don't need to find out how they are. Not focus on what you need from them or what they have to know from you, but actually personally. I reached out to one of my suppliers yesterday and just said, how are you guys doing? And their instant response was, this is what's happening, this is where we are, and we're working on your project. And my reply was, look, I didn't reach out for that. I know I'm not expecting you to deliver right now because you can't operate, but I just wanted to see how you are. And I wanted to reinforce that point for them. And then the third and perhaps the most important thing were the low scores on the willingness to ask for help. I presented on Wednesday morning for business leaders in Singapore, and I ran a word cloud poll. So I asked people to type in words that sprang to mind, how they feel when it came to asking for help. And the most common responses were all negative: uncomfortable, awkward, nervous, unsure. The most positive of the primary responses was hopeful. And even that isn't that positive. Now, these were business leaders. If leaders feel awkward about asking for help, then how do your teams feel? And if that's cascading down your organization, where are people asking for advice, insight, new ideas, introductions, referrals? And if people are frightened to do that, how's that going to be impacting the firm as a whole? So it's really important to create an environment where people are encouraged to build the right relationships, nurture them so that they are strong, and then leverage them so that they can ask. You're looking for a network of people who are in a position to help you, who want to help you, and then who know how to help you and when you need help. And that has to be absolutely key.
Thank you, Andy. Barry, I think we can all take away some thoughts about things as they used to say at school, things we could do better. And I love, I think it was Linda Hill who said that the CEO should be called the Chief External Officer, because their real focus should be external, not running the business. Ian, do you have a view on that particular point or not?
Everybody, I hope my view on that question will become apparent as I sketch out some of the thoughts that I've got on change, and particularly leading change in a environment, organisation of clever people. I think I'll probably start from the number of truths universally acknowledged that there are about leadership in professional services firms. Firstly, things on the whole have been pretty good for the last 2 or 3 decades. That's fed into a pretty powerful status quo bias on the part of many professionals in those organisations. It's also, I think, led to the formation of quite a strong professional bias that the the core skill of the accountant, the lawyer, the engineer, whatever it may be, is really the sort of prized commodity within the organisation, much more so than the management engineering. And those things together tend to lead to relatively slow acceptance of change. I think the other truth or set of truths universally acknowledged is when you're trying to lead change efforts, there are people at different stages every time on the adoption curve. So you've always got your early adopters, you've always got your people in the middle, and you've got your change resistors at the end. This leads to a set of tactics we're all familiar with in driving change within that environment, often trying to put through a burning platform kind of mentality in advance of any change, identifying our champions for any effort, and then using a bunch of influencing tactics, whether it's social proof within the organization of, this type of project has been a success with this team, why don't you guys take it up, to bringing in external expertise. It might be non-executive directors, might be advisors, to help promote the idea that you're looking to support. Incidentally, at a personal level, the managing partner or equivalent figures style is going to be very important in these areas. I personally don't believe, and I certainly don't claim to be one of, the sort of super charismatic business leaders within professional services who just through sheer force of personality can build a $100 million business, take it to the market, do all kinds of things, just getting everybody to fall in line with their ideas. It's a much more sort of political influencing process, I think, in many, many cases. So I think those are the sort of, that's where we sort of start. What we've got now is this sudden shock across the sort of political, economic, social, technological area caused by the pandemic. Even before we went into that, there were an awful lot of drivers of long-term change, whether it's Brexit, whether it's tech and AI adoption, whether it's new entrants to your particular market. But the last 8 to 10 weeks, I think, have got a very powerful, almost visceral series of messages to not only the leaders in these firms, but also the clever, experienced followers, if you can call them that, within the firms. So I think a couple of things. One is just the kind of profound depth of emotional experience that people have gone through over the last couple of months, so radically different from what they're used to. And that's led to a powerful sort of habit disruption. Both Francesca and Andy were talking on particular dimensions of that, whether it's the way you engage with your team, with your clients, with your wider network, and so on. And I was very interested, Richard, to see the slide that Rohit's going to use next week, in which he styled it as aftershocks and opportunities. That's the big picture view of how things might change. It's possible, though, things could slightly slip back to the old normal in some ways rather than the new normal. But I think I'd lean much more towards the view Rohit's going to give us. So this is very profound. This is going to make things very different. So a few sort of practical thoughts that flow from that by way of conclusion in my short section. Firstly, the old maxim about never wasting a good crisis is highly apposite at this point. There are lots of things you'll be wanting to do for some time. Now is the time to get on with them. You've got to make a bet one way or the other on what the future is going to be over the next 2 or 3 years. We can't afford just to hedge during that time. You need to make sure you've got the right skills on your leadership team. What got you here, as they say, won't necessarily get you there. You need that big picture vision, and you need it sold across a consensus of people within the firm. And finally, I think the most important thing for individuals on this call is you will probably have to adapt your style for the next 6 months, the next 12 months, very differently from what it was from the last 2 to 3 years, potentially being more visionary, more directive, even that little bit less democratic and consensual across the partnership. And on that slightly contentious note, Richard, I'll hand back to you.
It's quite interesting, Ian, because one of the issues we were looking at, I think it was Richard Thorby a few episodes ago, was the whole issue around styles and the idea that you, as a leader, need to adopt to take on a style which is suitable to the context, and that's something that a number of people have kind of explored, particularly from the sort of Daniel Goleman emotional intelligence perspective. The issue I kind of raised slightly on against it is the point around authenticity, and if you are suddenly seen to change your spots, will people believe that you really have changed, or that in 6 months' time you'll go back to being what you were before? And I don't have an answer to that, but I think there's what I call it rather sort of crudely, the gorilla on a lipstick on a gorilla syndrome. In other words, somebody who's known for being a hard driver suddenly become a soft, cuddly teddy bear probably won't work. But anyway, we'll explore that later in the dimension. And Jeremy, over to you to give your thoughts on, again, any aspect over the last 2 weeks, or if you want to pick up any of Ian's points of how you as a managing partner, albeit in an accounting run the law firm, how you see it, that would be interesting too.
Thank you, Richard, and good morning, everyone. And I hope, as ever, everyone is keeping well and safe. Last couple of weeks, from my point of view, just some headlines. We are finally at the position of getting our budget approved, hopefully next Monday, for the year to March 21. It's been a challenging process, to say the least. But I think we've got there. The biggest challenge, obviously, is around fees and getting to a comfortable position on fees. We have set what we think is a reasonably ambitious budget, but we have obviously some contingencies in there, and we also have triggers in there such that we can adjust things if we need to, which I'm sure we will do at various different times. The biggest challenge probably is matching supply and demand, knowing when that demand is going to happen, and making sure we've got the resource at that time to deal with that demand. And that's particularly challenging in the current environment where we're finding work is getting deferred, etc. We've put in place some pretty key KPIs from a financial point of view. And in particular, we're trying to get better visibility and make sure we track more accurately our future fees for the remainder of the year, so that we can see as early as possible whether we're going to run into some challenges around that. Just picking up on some of the comments earlier, key relationships, absolutely key, and it's easy to drift off, having been very on it, so to speak. Once we went into lockdown, we must keep in contact with our colleagues. We must keep in contact with our clients. We're very good at that. It's easy X weeks in to start to drift away from that, but I don't think we should underestimate that. And certainly with colleagues, you know, it never ceases to surprise me how much they value input and contact with partners, and that's right down to our new graduates, etc. So they really value that, and we should not underestimate that piece. We've just completed a staff survey, which again, the results of that was both looking at how they felt about the current situation, as well as what they feel about the future. The results from that were not hugely surprising, were pleasing. Some people, I think a greater percentage were more relaxed about the return to the office than perhaps I anticipated, obviously with certain concerns around transport, etc. But there was some very useful feedback from that, and we will take that away and work with that. I think just some of the comments around challenges of the way we're working and dealing with some of our colleagues. Of course, the situation we're in at the moment has been forced upon us. So actually, you know, the challenges sometimes with change and bringing colleagues with you has had to happen. And I have to say, all of our colleagues have been very supportive. I think we will see a lot of permanent change going forward, whether that's inevitably, I think there'll be a lot more working from home. We will need less space in our office. I'm sure that will be the case. But I think there is also recognition that we will need to get back to some of the ways of working that we had before. but certainly a recognition that for new business, that first initial face-to-face contact with people is very important. I suppose what's next, just looking down the line and picking on the point about being entrepreneurial, certainly on my mind now is we need to start looking at our future strategy and thinking about that and getting the group of partners together. At this time of year, typically we would have had a partners seminar, possibly an away day, away overnight, etc., to look at strategy. Of course, that can't happen at the moment, so we've got to think about how we deal with that and how we lead that as a management board. But certainly the future strategy is something that's now starting to come into my mind, given that we've dealt with a lot of the operational issues, although of course they will continue to be challenges for the foreseeable future. I think that's all the comments I had, Richard. Thank you.
Great. Welcome back, Francesca. The plumber sorted is all. That's good. Yeah, I've got the thumbs up. It's just plumbers are so hard to come by. I said yes, you can leave for 5 minutes to let the plumber in, but hopefully all good. A few questions. Thank you very much for those who put questions in. We're now moving into the panel session, the fireside chat, as I call it. And Paul's asked a question for Ian, in fact, regarding consolidation. Now, we had going back a number of weeks ago, I think it was Graham Durgan on the show, who said yes, he thought that there would definitely be a lot of consolidation. We've certainly seen one top 100 law firm going through a pre-pack administration already. As somebody who is hopefully a little not just involved in running the business, but also an observer on the scene, what are your thoughts on the structure of the industry, legal industry, I suspect, probably, but by all means talk about others if you wish.
Well, I'm slightly wary of falling into a trap that's said to afflict economists in that they predicted 8 out of the last 5 recessions. But subject to that, I think that firstly, there were already very good reasons for thinking that the rate of consolidation in the legal services industry certainly would increase over time. Increasingly, clients are looking for highly expert multidisciplinary services delivered from very efficient platforms which need to be operated at scale and have the people and expertise within them to support that. Now, being a firm, I think at about number 60 in the top 100 at the moment, we feel we can do that in our core areas of expertise, but we certainly don't feel we can do that as against the much larger players in their area of expertise. But for firms which are sort of more generally spread or at a stronger scale, it looks to me to be very, very difficult to keep pace with those expectations of the market over time. I personally think that the COVID-19 experience is going to further accelerate that pace of change. The economic drivers are almost certainly going to become stronger. We're going to suffer a very difficult economic period over the next 12, 24 months. That will affect clients in some sectors more than other. And coupled with that, you want to have this increased willingness for general counsel and other key buyers who've all been working remotely in the same way that we have, to consider new ways of doing things and to move forward with that. We won't be able to deliver those solutions unless we've got that scale, unless we've got that sophistication, or we're able to partner with people that do. The only other thought I'd perhaps throw in there is I don't necessarily think it's a total one-dimensional consolidation that might happen. There may be new offerings that come that allow small boutique offerings to maintain their kind of size and their brand strength, but to outsource all the platform elements of what they're trying to do to some other party. So back to you, Richard.
Yeah, it's interesting because one of the points in the AI world at the moment is, who are going to be actually doing the investment and who are going to be doing the following, because the idea that you can match a big four on its investment in AI for a mid-sized firm is a joke. GT, do you have any thoughts on consolidation, or do you think the accountancy sector has kind of got to a stable space after its big
there's nothing stable about accountancy, is there? I think there's and again, as always, you never know how these things are going to go, but there's bound to be firms that are under financial pressure, and it may be short-term financial pressure. It may be about the fact they go, we need to be part of something bigger, or we need to be part of something different. And I like Ian's point around might not be straight M&A, it might be more associations, linkages, allegiances, but consolidation in the market seems highly plausible. If I look at an international context, I'm seeing a lot of M&A opportunities coming up already, where people are going, we need to be something different for the future. And that could be a team, that could be a bigger piece. But the other really strong factor that comes through is that if you're thinking you could take advantage of some of those opportunities, you've got to be growth ready yourself. So what shape are you in to make that investment, to get the return, to have the finance to make it happen? And we've certainly been thinking about, if we're going to make plays in different markets, we've got to make sure we're in great shape. So when they come, we can do them. And it's a really good time to be thinking about being growth ready now.
There's a great expression of Carol Dweck, which is having a growth mindset as opposed to a fixed mindset. And the view is that many professional people look backwards in terms of long resumes rather than forwards in terms of growth, which kind of takes us to Rohit's question to Jeremy, if that's okay. And if you can see it, Jeremy, looking at when you're doing basing your strategy and your forward planning, what sort of view of the world are you adopting? What scenario are you looking for? A positive or a less positive outlook? And if so, if everybody was to be less positive, would that not in turn then delay recovery? Jeremy, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, as I said earlier, we've been, I think, fairly aggressive with setting our fee levels for the forthcoming year. That's against a backdrop of having achieved 12-13% growth each year for the last 3 years. So we're pretty optimistic that we can achieve a very similar fee level to last year, and that's what we're budgeting. So as I say, we come from the background of having achieved 12-13% per annum for the last X years. Therefore, we think a fee level similar to last year is achievable. The flex we have in the budget is that we have some discretionary contingent expenditure that we can turn on at different times of the year. So that's how we're dealing with it. But we were very keen to really have one budget without different scenarios that we can then flex if things change, to make sure that we're all singing from the same tune and everyone is pushing to achieve that fee target level.
Thanks. And I think that kind of answers Arif's question as well regarding have you reduced targets for income? Yeah. So thank you for that. Andy, again, this may be sort of hopefully not taking you totally into left field, but as well as being a guru and expert on relationships, you're also running a small business. And a number of the people on this call are consultants or people who are leaders, but of a very small organization for whom they don't possibly have the stability of the audit or the stability of clients that are going to be having employment issues or possibly even litigation issues once the courts reopen. What are the sort of issues that you, as the owner of a small business, are looking at when you're doing your budgeting? Just give me some sense of that.
Well, I think first of all, it will vary sector to sector. You know, my sector particularly serves industries that have disappeared in the short term. You know, live events and learning and development. So for us, it's not so much about the size of the business; it's about the sectors we serve, and it's about repositioning what we do so that we can serve our clients in a different way. And that's very much the focus at the moment. The government, I think, have generally been very positive in the support that they've offered business, but a lot of businesses are falling through the cracks, you know, and we would include ourselves among them. And a lot of consultancy style businesses, I think, will be impacted in a very big way. So for us, I very much agree with the positive growth mindset. My approach to this change in our business has been to double down on strategy and forward thinking. And instead of a survival mindset, it's turned into what do I need to do in the time that I'm being given right now to reinforce my opportunities for when we come out of this, or if we don't come out of this, so that I can turn my business around. So I think that's got to be a primary focus. Obviously, from a budgeting perspective, small investments that are going to help grow the business, we will still go ahead with, and you know, we've made a couple this week. Larger projects which require deeper investment obviously have to wait until we know that we've got the revenues coming in. What I've seen in the last week or so, and it literally is just the last week or so, is clients and potential clients are starting to show interest again in spending. And it's taken, I thought that would start to, those conversations would start after Easter, but it took another month. But those conversations are taking place now, and colleagues I talk to are in the same boat. So I think the economy is starting to loosen up a little bit, but we're a long way from it.
Okay, well, let's pick up, it's in the chat, in fact, but Colin has asked a little bit about Ian in terms of the comment around outsourcing office occupation, and whether you have any views on that in the context of social distancing.
Richard, I think Colin's very interesting comment in the chat was picking up in part on what I'd said about potential for outsourcing, and it struck me that you know, firms are going to be prioritising a couple of things in their space requirements over the next, say, 5 years. One, of course, is delivering the best client experience they can, and that's a change thing from what it was 5 or 10 years ago. And the other, of course, is as much flexibility for their worker accommodation as possible, together with obviously greatly increased emphasis on health and safety. Now, you know, firms have done a decent job of delivering on their premises requirements over many years, but with those new dimensions, it strikes me there may be more willingness to look at third-party solutions, a kind of post-COVID supersized WeWork type of approach in some cases, where those things can be better handled by experts. So I think any firm that's got a big premises event coming up in the next couple of years is going to have to make quite a brave call on how those trends are going to play out.
Yeah, and I think there's also the issue which sometimes called is hoteling. In other words, that if you want your people to work together, and Andy may have view on this as well, that actually, I remember Google was saying some time ago that you have this vision of everybody in Google somehow sort of working from home. Well, that actually isn't the case at all. They have actually quite small groups, probably about 10 people, work very closely together as teams, are surrounded by video conference booths, etc., so they can interact with others, but that the team works better as a team if it's in one place and ideas can, what should we say, bounce off each other, because as I think you were saying this earlier, Andy, you know, having everybody in your network who's the same ends up with a lot of groupthink. So do you have any thoughts on that one, Andy?
Yeah, I do. I've noticed in the chat as well a few people commenting on the impact of social distancing. Rohit has just said a lot will depend on that. I'll pick up on what Francesca said earlier about how internal meetings were starting to drift in terms of frequency. And I think that as soon as you do start to get teams working wholly from home or remotely in any form, that connection starts to fray. I have a client in Germany who moved from 13 different offices into one purely because there was just no innovation when the team was split up and working separately to each other. So I'm not a believer in that we'll see a massive change in the way that we work in the future. I think people will revert back to office space. The longer this goes on with remote working, the less likely that will remain true. But it takes a long time to change habits. And I think we will gravitate back towards working in teams to a large degree, both from a corporation perspective, organizational perspective. Organizations prefer to have people working together for many reasons, including the ones I just said, but also the individual perspective. You know, people do draw energy from working with colleagues and learning from them.
Francesca, do you have any thoughts on that? Do you think in the networks that you cover, there's a move back towards the office, or is it like the survey I saw recently, which said 1/3 of people are really happy at home, 1/3 are desperate to get back to the office, and the others are willing to have a conversation about it?
Yeah, I think there's a fascinating difference between people's working environments. So you say you look at somewhere like Hong Kong or bits of China where you've got high density housing, and working from home is not a desperately enjoyable experience. And they're really keen to get back into offices. And you're seeing that in China, you're seeing it in Hong Kong. They want to go back to work because they find it easier to work from the office than from home. But if you look at somewhere like Australia, I was chatting to the obviously managing partner in the Sydney office, and they were going, well, actually, we need to be thinking about our longer term strategy and property, but short term, to get people in, we need to socially distance. You actually need quite a lot of space to socially distance. So we can't quite see how we can reduce our office space at the moment. Longer term, just need to find out what we truly need. And our Irish office, we've got a very large office in Dublin, and they just had invested in this fantastic new space. And there we go, well, typical, we've just moved in and now we've had to shut it down temporarily. But they've just gone back and they did a survey, and most people said, we want to carry on working from home. But as they've opened the office up, they've had about sort of 60 to 70 people coming in regularly, and that's gradually creeping up. So you get the sense people are finding their way on this. But the long-term issue about how much office space do you really need, I think that's going to be very live for most of us for quite a while to come.
And also, I guess, and Rohit, thank you for the point, but the World Health Organization talks about a 1 meter spacing. UK is apparently at the extreme in 2 meters at the moment. And obviously with 2 meters, you can get 4 times less people into your offices, which is a bit like the public transport, less than 20% of public transport, etc. So there's just a lot of constraints. Anyway, 2 minutes to go. So I think I'll probably, if I may, bring the formal proceedings to a halt. Thank you for the team. I'll just do a couple of sort of outro slides just to kind of bring people up to speed with things that are coming up next. And can I thank the team, everybody on the panel today for their contribution. As I think you're probably all aware, those that have been on the call already will be aware that every time each of these is being recorded, and therefore we are eager to make sure that you get those videos. Also wanted to say that on the 3rd of June, the CX challenge in a post-pandemic world is the topic, and hope you enjoyed today. Please recommend your peers to sign up, and also consider supporting our work by joining the forum. So thank you very much, and have a wonderful day, everybody. Bye for now.